Hello, Antonia. How are you?
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us at the Happy Place Festival, the virtual version. How are you doing over there? Is this coming live from your living room?
No, this is actually our basement, but we've got quite a fancy basement. We did up our basement.
It's fancy.
So this is like when we have people to stay. We've got, I won't move my camera, but we've got the world's smallest kitchen over there, that way. And we've got a little bit of sunlight. And this is in Brighton. I live in Brighton. So
look at that light for a basement. I'm thinking that's pretty fantastic if that's your basement.
My wife, Andrea, she just likes painting everything white. So we just go for white. And I like white for mental health. I like living in a light.
I know what you mean.
And all the houses around us are white. And so we're just sort of in this like weird white world. Yes, like light box.
So it's a huge question at the moment, really, isn't it? When people say, so how are you? As at point of recording, it's still lockdown. We're on what, week 11? Who are you in lockdown with? How's the family?
Well, there's four of us. So there's my wife, Andrea, and we've got two children, Lucas and Pearl, who are 11 and 12. Very close.
Great names.
And like everyone, I think it's very hard to encapsulate how I feel, because there's been aspects which have been horrendous, and certainly near the start, my brain could not cope with the overload of the news, of the lifestyle change, of everything, of worrying about people, of telling my parents to stay indoors, all of that stuff.
Them probably not listening.
They're not listening very well, no, and flaunting the rules. And it's been weird. So there's that stress, obviously, which everyone's had. Then there was a sort of like, I felt a bit guilty at the start because I was already in an anxiety dip anyway before all this. And then this came along, and it was obviously scary, but then I felt guilt because I'm so sort of privileged, not having to go out to work, relatively financially secure, not being a frontline worker, people in much worse situations. And then you're thinking, I'm feeling the anxiety and depression again, and I shouldn't be feeling that. So that sort of stuff, happened in March, first half of April. But then when I got into a kind of rhythm of it, I'm
into the swing of lockdown.
Swing. Some people have found it like got worse and worse and worse, and other people have I'm terrible for the first sort of 2 weeks of the crisis. But
kind of recalibrating. You need to settle.
Yeah, it's the clunky gear change, and then once I'm in it, I'm sort of like, fine, let's get over it. And there's certain things I actually want to keep about this. I obviously don't want this reality to stay forever, but hopefully certain aspects I will hold on to, I think.
Well, please share. What positives are you taking from lockdown? I love to hear the good that can come of this.
Well, it's like an enforced life edit, isn't it? It's like, it's totally like our lives are so cluttered, or have been so cluttered, and we're in this sort of age of sort of consumer choice and infinite everything, and aspects of that we haven't got. I mean, normally in normal times, the things I look forward to are all things which have been basically illegal now. So I look forward to like restaurants, booking holidays, going to the theatre, going to the cinema, things that you can't do.
In theory, very simple things that we were so lucky to be normality.
Yeah, and it would be absolutely mad, from the perspective of 2019, to have this flash forward where we say, oh yeah, something happens where you literally can't go to the cinema, you can't go to the restaurant or the pub or anything for months on end.
Yeah.
We're like, what?
See anyone?
What is this?
You can't see your loved ones.
Yes, exactly. I should have mentioned that as well as I
think you did at the beginning. It's fine. It was just before cinema.
Yeah, that's fine. Seeing relatives as well is quite good sometimes.
Shout out to mum and dad.
Yeah, we had a Zoom. I'll tell you what doesn't work. We did, well, it might work for some people, but we tried a Zoom quiz the other day with all the family together, and there's far too many people involved.
Chaos.
Yeah, it wasn't happening. People speaking over each other, and yeah, didn't work. But no, I think what I will take away is the fact that a lot of the things I fill my life with, I don't actually need, and I can do things in a simpler way. And I kind of like, well, I've liked, for instance, not going to a gym and actually working out at home. And I obviously want gyms to stay in business and employ people, but selfishly, I've quite liked to be able to join a free online gym class, because the idea of me normally walking into like a yoga class, I'd be like, no, I can't do that. But when I just go downstairs and do it on my mat, I quite like that. But I'm quite introverted, really. I'm sort of extroverted online and stuff, and I have to do public things with my job. But I think I'm quite suited to being quite insular and introverted.
It's made all of our worlds so much smaller and simpler.
Yes. And
I find most people I am talking to on here with the Happy Place family, or, you know, just for family and friends, I think everyone's kind of enjoying stripping things back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
A bit of a noise. It's a different.
It's like the acoustic version of us. It's like all the extra cacophony.
Yeah, well put.
Yeah, we've just.
I like that. It's a live acoustic.
Yes.
Not got like the pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
Strip back. So Matt, you're an author for both children and adults. How different is that writing process? Or is it actually quite similar?
Well, I write all kinds of different things. So yes, I write for children and I write for grown-ups. I also write fiction and non-fiction. I've written about mental health. I write made-up stories. And to be honest, writing always feels like writing. So everything you write, every book you write, feels different, but it doesn't necessarily feel different because, oh, this book's for a child or this book's for an adult. You kind of go with what the book is. Like I wrote a children's book about Father Christmas as a boy called A Boy Called Christmas. And that felt exactly the same as writing a book for grown-ups, but it was obviously a children's book because it was about Father Christmas, and there's certain things you can't put in a children's book. The only difference is actually more fun in some ways writing for children, because
I was going to say, do you have a bit of a preference in the process?
Yeah, writing for children is fun because children's imaginations are just so wide open. They will go with anything, and they'll know it's not necessarily real. If you have a troll or an elf or whatever character you've got in your book, they'll know it's not real. But unlike with an adult, you don't have to explain it too hard. You can just go with the dream of it and just have them, accept things on that imaginative level. Whereas I think adults, every year, our sort of imagination just gets a little bit smaller and smaller and smaller. And so to broaden it out for adults is sometimes hard to do. But what I try and do when I'm writing a book for grown-ups is to imagine I'm writing for children, but writing for children who can cope with some rude scenes, some violence, and some long words. But essentially, that it's writing for children. Because I think if you act like you're writing for children, it's more freeing than when you think that you're writing for.
I was going to say, does it almost, if you think that your audience is for children, it's more creative almost. Mentally, you're sort of more experimental with your writing.
Yes, I think so. So people always think about what you can't put in a children's book, like the rude things you can't put in. But actually, it's more of a case of what you can't put in a grown-up book. Because with children, you can literally, you never feel freer as a writer than when you're writing for children. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why some of our most historically famous writers we've had, whether it's J.K. Rowling, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, or whatever, have essentially been children's writers, because it's the sort of freest, most pure kind of writing.
And I was reading that The Boy Called Christmas is being made into a feature-length film with an all-star cast.
Yes, and we were very lucky that it was filmed last year and early this year, because we just stopped filming before lockdown and this whole thing.
Oh, that's so lucky.
Just honestly, we were so lucky. And yeah, no, it's amazing. And the most amazing bit, well, last year we went to Prague and I managed to wangle it and abuse my power by saying my children should be in a scene. So my two children, Lucas and Pearl, are going to be elves in a school scene in the North Pole. But also the best thing was in January this year, Maggie Smith is one of the people in it, and Maggie Smith
my gosh,
was filming the opening scene, and it was in Primrose Hill in London, and they shut down like 4 streets of Primrose Hill. Obviously shutting down streets feels quite normal nowadays, but back in January it felt like a spectacular thing. And yes, that's when it felt real and surreal. That's something that started, well, actually, it started as a question my son had asked me. My son had said, what was Father Christmas like as a child? And I didn't have, it was one of those questions that children ask late at night and you don't have a really good zippy answer. I sort of said, oh, I'll go away and write the answer. And that became the book, which became the film, which will be out next year because hardly any films coming out this year. But yeah.
That is magical, Matt. Lucas must be like, good answer, Dad.
Yeah.
Very good answer.
And so I then had to write a book for my daughter as well to keep things even. But yeah, no, that was nice. And also I wrote that straight after writing my book, Reasons to Stay Alive, which was very different about my experience of depression and having a breakdown and panic attacks. And so I also just wanted to write something that was the absolute opposite of an autobiographical story of mental health and all the rest.
A story about Christmas for children couldn't be more of a tonic to, a self-help sort of memoir that's so personal.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to write a Christmas book. I want to come on to that because, huge bestseller, Reasons to Stay Alive. It's so raw and so honest. It takes the reader into what it feels like to be going through a mental breakdown. It must have been such a ride for you to put your story out there and for it to then become this huge kind of tome for self-help and people who have, those mental health issues and problems themselves.
Yeah, it was really a strange thing for me because out of all the books I've written, it was the one I thought would do least well. And it was the only one, I wrote because I felt like I had to write it. I didn't write it, for any other reason other than it felt like the right time to do it. My publisher at the time was like, wow, maybe just turn it into fiction, maybe, turn it into a novel and don't make it so directly about you. And I had no idea how to write it. I wasn't very used to talking openly about my mental health experience. So that book, in a way, was the first time I'd come out, as it were, about all that I'd gone through and having a breakdown and depression and anxiety. And writing it was kind of like reliving it. But it wasn't a painful experience. It felt very much like letting go of something. It felt, I hate the word, but it did feel like a kind of closure or taking ownership of something. And it was quite organic and natural the way it took off because it didn't have a big, massive launch or anything. It happened quite naturally with word of mouth, and it just sort of grew and grew and grew. And it was a very nice thing, but also a difficult thing that, having been a writer for about a decade before that, and the classic sort of struggling writer and wanting a bestseller and all of that, it was quite a mixture of feelings for finally getting that, but also getting it for something which leaves you wide open, and then getting loads of emails and messages from people who are going through similar or have had suicidal feelings themselves, or someone's taken their own life in their family, and a lot of harrowing stuff, which I struggled to deal with at the start, because I was having to get back to people. I was starting to feel
it's a pressure, and I imagine something that you then feel a responsibility if people are showing bravery and getting in touch, like the bravery you showed in writing and publishing about your breakdown. It must be a pressure to kind of keep up with all of that.
Yeah, totally. And I had to sort of quickly learn to set my own boundaries of what I can't really say to people. I'm not a doctor. I didn't have any medical training. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm just a person who went through an experience and conveyed that experience, an experience essentially of recovery, or at least getting out of a terrible place to a less bad place. And, people, I hoped initially that would help some people, and also help some people who haven't had depression understand what it's like.
To kind of step inside it.
Yeah, because I think that's a frustration for people who still now, even though the mental health conversation and people talk, you see celebrities all the time talking openly about mental health. I think people who haven't actually experienced an extreme
episode,
bad state of mental health, in my case it was panic disorder, anxiety, depression to quite severe levels. I think it's very hard to understand. It's kind of a hard thing to explain. Certainly when I was ill, I found it hard to verbalize and articulate to people, to my parents, to friends, for two reasons. Partly because you feel often so lethargic and tired, it's physically just exhausting talking. And also because often it makes you feel worse when you're having to talk about it yourself. So I wanted very much to write in the simplest way I could possibly write about mental health, to actually articulate what some of those feelings are like, not to make people feel worse, but to actually help people explain and feel less alone, or more understanding of their spouse or partner or child or parent or whoever it was that they know going through something.
To anyone attending the Happy Place Festival who's maybe feeling lonely, anxious, or experiencing panic attacks, what would your advice be, that first step to get better, to get help?
Well, I think a lot of the time we talk about stigma, we're actually talking about self-stigma. So I think for me, the biggest and early challenge was admitting I was feeling something that I shouldn't be feeling. And, I hated labels. I hated the idea of being someone with depression or anxiety or panic disorder and these things. I felt like it was a weakness of me. So the first thing is just to know that it's a horrible experience, but it's a very common experience, especially in this world we find ourselves now. It's a very common, almost universal experience, and there's absolutely no shame in it. And the first thing is you need to talk to people, and you need to sort of get a diagnosis and actually understand what's happening. And there's so much information out there now to help people. And it's about finding what's right for you. I mean, with mental health, even more than physical health, there's no one route which works for absolutely everyone. Some people swear by medication. Some people, find that medication makes them feel worse. Some people swear by therapy. There's different things that work for people. So it's mainly about just getting aware of yourself and, your own laboratory, and working out what works for you. I mean, for me personally, a big thing was getting physically healthier than I was, because I was young, I was being naughty in Ibiza, and I wasn't sleeping. I'd been taking drugs, I'd been drinking, but alcohol was my main thing. I was I wouldn't have said I was an alcoholic, but I was someone who had a lot to drink every day of my life at that point. So literally getting myself physically healthy and physically stronger was a big part of my recovery. And then also accepting that although what I was feeling was intense, it wasn't me, it was something I was experiencing. And the thing I talk a lot about in my books and stuff, and it can sound corny sometimes, but essentially it's like being in a storm. Like you can have a storm or a hurricane happen, and it can be dangerous, and it can be life-threatening. It can knock you off your feet. It can make you shake with cold. But you know that you're not the storm. However dangerous or deadly that storm is, you have some distance from that. Whereas with mental health things, you end up thinking you are depression, or you are anxiety, or you are panic. You are this thing. And like even it's in our language, we say I am depressed, and rather than I have depression or I'm experiencing depression. And for me, that separation to say, oh, I have depression, at this moment, it's not going to be every moment of my life, but I'm going through this thing now, was quite important.
I like the storm analogy because, as someone who's had episodes of anxiety and depression, as you said, which is so true, so many people do and have. I like the storm analogy because when sometimes you can see it coming, and obviously it's far away, and maybe you can see the storm coming in. So that's when you sort of think, right, okay, I'm not in it yet. What can I do to help myself at this point? And then also when you look behind you and you can see it's past, and you can't see how bad that storm is until it's in the distance. And then you're like, God, that was savage. If I survived it.
Yes, you survived it.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I get worried about people who are having their first experience of it, because I think, it can always feel bad at whatever stage you're at in life, but that first time can be so disorientating. Whereas now, like, I do get anxiety and I do get depression, and I've struggled with my mental health at times during lockdown. But the difference is I have a much better understanding of things that make me feel worse, things that make me feel better, what I need to do, how long it may or may not last, and all of that stuff. Whereas at the start, is one thing that makes it worse is that confusion about, how long it's going to be and all of that.
Well, I'd love to know what's in your, what I call for me, my sort of toolkit, things that help me. What's in your sort of mental health toolkit?
Well, it changes, and it's changed over the years. I mean, at the moment, I do a exercise in the morning. I try and keep sort of regular hours. So I try and it's been harder than ever in lockdown to do that. But I've found that sort of getting up, getting washed, getting ready, after a early morning workout. So I need to do something that's sort of like physical, like cardio workout. I've been doing half marathons in my garden like an idiot every Sunday, because I tried going out running, but Brighton was just so full of people, and the park was so full of people. I just found it stressful, dodging everyone and people getting cross with you. So I just
social distancing when running is very awkward.
Yeah, so I opened up all my doors in my house, and the last 3 Sundays I'd done a half marathon by running back and forth.
That is crazy, but also very impressive.
Yeah, it was a bit too much. I wouldn't recommend that for everyone. I think I'm going to have a break this Sunday. But yeah, staying generally physically healthy, getting interested in things. I often think, when you have a sort of mental crisis, but by its nature, it sends you inwards. It sends you obsessed with yourself, not in a selfish way, just by the nature of it. Just like if your leg is on fire, you're obsessed with your leg being on fire. With mental health, you go inward, because that's what pain does. So I think getting super curious and interested in things outside of you, whether that be books, whether it be an amazing Netflix series. I can remember when Game of Thrones first started, I was in an anxiety patch, and I suddenly got obsessed with Game of Thrones to a sort of geek level. But that helped me not think about my own sort of real world situation. So whatever it is, learning an instrument, listening to some new music or whatever, getting very nerdy and into something, for me, is another thing.
I think that's very good advice, because it's something that I do struggle with, especially because how it can manifest is that feeling that you've got nothing to say, and you know, there's so much noise at the moment, like you said, about lockdown, but also politically. But I do think just reading and checking in and keeping up to date to a point then does take you outside of your, it sounds cruel, but your navel gazing. It's not optional. You don't want to always be looking inside, but sometimes that is just, like you said, it's not you, it's the...
Yes, but it's very internal by its nature. So anything that can make you more external, even if it's within your own home, is a good thing. And you know, like the very worst thing you can do if you've got health anxiety, like I have sometimes, and I certainly have had in 2020, is to start Googling stuff and like Googling symptoms and going on Dr.
I'm very
Google.
strict with Dr. Google.
Yeah. Yes, you have to be. But that's symptomatic of what, you know, as soon as you start getting that sort of self-obsession about symptoms or this, that, and the other, it always automatically makes it worse. And I've learned that my mind can give me any symptom. Like at the start of this crisis, I had a perpetual cough, which I am pretty sure was not COVID, but it was just my brain. That was the thing it was worried about. So it made a cough. You know, I spent a lot.
Our mind's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I spent most of my 30s convinced I had arthritis because I've got arthritis in my family, and like my body would make every joint ache just by concentrating on it. It's very strange, the power of the mind in negative and positive ways.
It's strong and it is powerful.
Definitely.
And difficult to tame, I think, at times. I want to talk a little more about your books. After the success of Reasons to Stay Alive, were you anxious about the second book in terms of, you know, like that tricky second album? Did you feel the pressure to have another huge bestseller?
Well, more than that, I felt the pressure to not look like I was cashing in on Reasons to Stay Alive, because that had been such a personal book, and because of the nature of its subject matter. I didn't want to do Reasons to Stay Alive 2. I didn't want to do more Reasons to Stay Alive.
More Reasons to Stay Alive.
Or like, you know, like, I'll show my age now, but like a Police Academy version of, you know, Reasons to Stay Alive, Mission to Moscow, or something that felt too sequely. So I was determined not to write another mental health book until I had a reason to write another mental health book. So I went away and I wrote that children's book I was talking about, A Boy Called Christmas. I wrote to adult novel, How to Stop Time. And I felt like I didn't really have anything else to say. But during that period, I would notice, certainly on the internet, how much modern life and aspects of modern life were stressing me out. And certainly a lot of technological stuff. And I was getting into Twitter wars with people, and I wouldn't be with my kids. I'd be online arguing with strangers in America about politics, and I was getting addicted and worried about what people think, and getting obsessed with like follower numbers and likes and all of that stuff, which can draw you in. And people were, you know, they were talking about it in an anecdotal way, but no one had really sort of talked about it in book form. And I just wanted to write a book about mental health in context. So rather than my story about mental health, about what about the modern world is actually affecting our mental health. Because we do that all the time with physical health. We know that passive smoking is bad for us. We know, you know, there's regulations about what fast food companies can advertise and stuff like that. But we don't talk about the social aspect of mental health that much, or at least we don't understand it that much. And I didn't understand it that much, but I wanted to write a book looking at that and answering those questions. So I wrote Notes on a Nervous Planet, which was much sort of looser and broader than Reasons to Stay Alive. But it was quite helpful for me to understand the aspects of modern life that were driving me insane.
Yes, I mean, social media, it's so, you know, it's so intrusive because all of us are pretty much addicted and attached to our phones. Yes. What's your advice, or how do you navigate the noise of social media?
Well, you know, I'm still bad at it sometimes. I know the theory, and I don't always follow the theory, but things that work for me are literally physically distancing myself from my phone. So the big one for me, when I can do it and when I'm strong enough, is to not have my phone in the bedroom. So if I charge my phone overnight in the kitchen, I will have a better day the next day, because I will have fallen asleep better and quicker. I won't have had an hour and a half in the morning scrolling through everything before I'm up or exercised. And it's a hard one, because I think something like 80% of us have the phone by the bed. And, you know, I do a lot of the time, but I know that if I physically distance myself from it, I won't get into that obsession with looking at all the news, you know, the bad news going from, I don't know, The Guardian to the Times to BBC to the Daily Mail to Instagram to Twitter to emails to text to WhatsApp. And so you just need...
A lot of noise.
Yeah, a lot of noise, exactly. So, yeah, physically removing yourself. Going for a walk with your dog, if you have a dog, and not taking your phone with you. Things like that. And taking away notifications, doing more fun stuff on it. Like, there's certain aspects I like about it. Like when I'm running, I like the fact that I've got an app on my phone that can tell me if I've done however many miles and compete with myself. So using the sort of aspects of it that actually make me feel better, and using less of the stuff that makes me feel worse. I mean, my weakness is Twitter. I use Instagram quite a lot, but Instagram doesn't affect me. I think if I was a teenager, especially if I was like a teenage girl, it would probably stress me out and make me feel inferior. But because I'm a sort of middle-aged man, on Instagram, everyone knows. Yeah, exactly. So I think it can be harder for women because of the whole sort of like looking at these, you know,
filtered lives.
Yes, totally.
When you're sat in your pajamas and a, you know, pint of Ben and Jerry's, feeling a bit depressed, and someone's on a free trip to the Bahamas, you're like, ah.
Yeah, I can understand that. And to be honest, it has, you know, I've had moments of that. I think the problem with Instagram particularly is the fact that we're not meant, you know, we forget, we're not just comparing ourselves with one person. So what happens to our brain is you go through Instagram, and just before you even get up, you can see something like 200 people on there. And you're seeing the best bits of not just one person. You're seeing the best, most filtered moments of hundreds of people. Often not like, they're not the people that would normally be in your circle of friends. You're talking about some of the most eccentric or extreme people in the world. You know, you're talking about, you know, a Kardashian, or you're talking supermodels, or you're talking extremely rich people or extremely popular people. These are not, you know, in your normal life of your normal neighborhood, you would not be encountering these people. And now we can meet these very special, inverted commas, people, and who can, however positive they're being, make us feel inferior, not out of jealousy, but just you inevitably measure your life against other people's lives. So Instagram can be bad for that. But for me personally, Twitter was the one where I just didn't like the way people talk to each other on Twitter. And
yeah, it's an ugly place, mostly. Yeah, I think, in my opinion.
Yes, and I was very addicted to it, and I still like it, going on it for news and stuff like that. But my problem as a human being is that I'm a very weird cocktail of a personality, where I'm a very sensitive person, but I'm also very opinionated. So and that's the worst combination for Twitter. So I will express opinions, but then be extremely bothered when people get
very wounded when people fight back.
Yes, and I'm never sort of like, outside of politicians, I'd never be nasty about any person on there, but I can be very forthright in my opinions on there. And you get all sorts instantly, and people really, even more than Instagram, people forget they're dealing with real human beings on Twitter.
Has it given you a thicker skin, do you think?
No, not really. It hasn't given me a thicker skin, but it has made me understand not to take it personally, because they it's irrelevant to them who you are. You could be literally anyone expressing that opinion, or anyone that they just want to lash out.
They're not thinking, I'm going to say this to get Matt Haig. They're just kind of, they're not thinking. And I think they're in life.
We're thinking that. It's, you know, the amount of people I've met in real life after knowing them on social media and realizing they're an incredibly different person to the person I was envisaging in my head from their Twitter profile, their Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I realize now that it's something else. I mean, it is real, but it's not real at the same time.
So has lockdown been quite productive for you? Have you been able to sort of think and put time into what next for Matt Haig?
Yes and no. It's been a very good time to sort of focus on things. I'd just finished writing a novel called The Midnight Library just before lockdown started, so I didn't actually have that much work to do.
That's brilliant.
Brilliant in one way, but then I found myself on Instagram all the time just writing stuff. And yeah, within this time I've come up with a new sort of mental health book idea called The Comfort Book, because I've been writing myself things to sort of say to myself to sort of comfort me through stressful situations. So I thought about expanding that into a book. So I'll be doing that. And so, yeah, I suppose so.
You can bring to me and the Happy Place audience?
Well, essentially that's basically what I've learned during this time is that however catastrophic you imagine things to be and however catastrophic you imagine things are in life, we've got an amazing capacity for surviving stuff and for sort of getting through, and how situations change. Even the worst situations in the world change. Even if you have depression for life, your attitude to that depression changes and you can learn things about yourself and grow with it. And that's been my experience of lockdown too. I literally felt at the start, everything's going to get worse. Every day is going to be worse than the one before. It's all going to be bad. It's all going to be terrible.
We're resilient human beings, aren't we?
And you somehow find the optimism, and you kind of need the bad times. I mean, you don't want this level of bad times, but in life, you know, you kind of need the bad times to find some gratitude when things are better. So I think after this, you know, I'll never go to the cinema now, or go to a restaurant, or see my mum and dad, or sort of just be out with friends in a pub and take it for granted. You know, all that stuff which was our default normality before will now have this sort of magic element to it.
Oh, totally. Oh, to be back in the cinema.
Yeah.
Some pizzas and salted popcorn. I can't wait.
I know. I haven't missed sort of big swanky things or anything. It's those little things of just sitting in a cafe.
It's the small luxuries.
Absolutely.
Matt, I could sit and talk to you for hours, but I won't. And no. I am going to wrap up with a question I'm asking all of my guests, which is, what, where, or who is your happy place?
What, where, or who?
Can be anything.
Well, I feel like I have to be soppy and say my partner, who's helped me and supported me through all this time. But also literally in as a literal place, my happy place is beside my toaster. I've been living off Marmite and peanut butter on toast, and it's my
together.
Yeah, Marmite and then peanut butter together. You can even buy it in a jar together. It's great.
Wow, I love both.
But you wouldn't like them. Well, if you've got a salty kind of taste.
Okay, I might try that. Okay. Yeah.
So that's
I like that mix.
Andrea. I haven't eaten much today.
And standing next to your toaster, waiting for the toast to pop.
That's a bit, yeah. I've probably got a more thought out one, but no, I'll go with my toaster.
Okay, you can always get back to us.
Okay.
But I think that's a good answer. Matt, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been such a pleasure just to sit and talk to you and do all of this over. So thank you so much for joining me tonight.
That's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If if you like that video, there are loads more talks, classes, and exclusive videos from the Happy Place Virtual Festival. So don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Do follow us on Instagram for constant updates, and enjoy.